Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Philippa Rappaport. I'm the lead for education and engagement at the Smithsonian Office of Educational Technology, which is a central education office at the Smithsonian and the office behind the Smithsonian Learning Lab. I'm joined today by Anna Hindley and Ariel Moon of the Early Childhood Education Initiative at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. Anna is the director and Ariel is the lead education specialist of this entire initiative. So in this session, we'll explore how museum objects can be used to create joyful and empowering learning experiences for preschool through second grade students. Anna and Ariel will model how celebration and affirmation can be the foundation of early conversations about history, culture, and identity with children. They'll share the museum's, it's called NMAAHC Kids Joyful ABCs online resource collection for use in participants' classrooms. And based on the book, A is for All the Things You Are by Anna, this series of activity books and videos uses museum objects and stories of Black history and culture to support all children to express and love themselves. The session will focus on supporting educators to use developmentally appropriate strategies for beginning these important conversations and lessons by utilizing the Joyful ABC series resources. So it's really been a pleasure to watch this program grow since the museum's founding. And the techniques that Anna and Ariel will model and discuss today are truly foundational to a healthy society. And I'm so pleased that they're here to present today. So a few logistics before we dive in. Today's program is one in a series. Oh, sorry, that was the slide I wanted to show you with their names. Whoops. Okay. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat while we're getting started. And then for logistics, so you're joining us on the Smithsonian Learning Lab, which is a place where you can discover, create, and share digitized museum content from across the Smithsonian. And you can learn much more about that by exploring our site. But today's program is one in a series that we call Cultivating Learning. And this is a monthly offering where educators from the Smithsonian and also nationally model techniques for using digital museum resources to support student learning in a whole range of learning environments. So our upcoming sessions, we have one coming up April 11th. That's with colleagues from the National Air and Space Museum, using rockets to investigate forces and motion. And then another one on May 21st with an educator from the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. And she'll be looking at a story map, a Masters of Tradition story map. So to learn more about these programs and also to learn more about the Smithsonian Learning Lab, I invite you to visit our help page. You can see that link down there at the bottom of the screen. Other than that, this is the education page, and I'll put that link in the chat. We would love for this to be interactive today. So please, if you're joining us from YouTube, you can put your comments there at the bottom right of your screen. If you're joining us through Facebook, although we're just learning we might have a problem with our Facebook connection today, but if you're able to get through, you can just find your comment section in the bottom center of the screen. So one of the things is we like to start out with a question, and I really don't think I could love today's question any more than I do. So here's the question. What makes you amazing? And while you're putting your answers in the chat there, I'll turn it over to Anna.
Thanks, Philippa. Philippa, it is just such an honor to be able to share our work with you and everyone who is here today. So I want to say an extra big thank you to those who are participating, that you've chosen to spend time with us. And I also want to express my gratitude to all the teachers and caregivers out there who work every day to support the children in their lives to have a positive sense of self. So while you're answering the question about what makes you amazing and what makes you special, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself and Ariel, what we do, and the museum that we work at. So, as Philippa mentioned, I am the Director of Early Childhood Education at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I am joined by one of my favorite colleagues and thought partners, and one of my dearest friends, Ariel Moon, who you'll hear a lot more from in a moment. And we work together to serve our youngest visitors starting from birth. So, from birth to 8 years old is our early childhood audience. And as we all know, children are so much part of the grown-ups in their lives at that age, whether it's their family, their community, their school. And so we do a lot of work with the grown-ups in that age as well. And if you're not as familiar with our museum is the only national museum fully devoted exclusively to the documentation of African American life, history, and culture. And through our exhibitions and programs, we explore American history. We look at it through the African American lens. We believe that Black history is American history and that it is part of all of our history to know and learn. Um, we uplift what connects us as humans through the stories in our museum and through the objects in our collection. Our museum was also envisioned to be a place of healing and reconciliation for our nation, for beyond our national borders globally, to really think about, again, what connects us as humans as we talk about honest history. So for Ariel and me, we spend a lot of time thinking about all of those really big concepts, complex ideas, and what that means for young children and how we can build their understanding of history, race, identity, um, again, all these complex ideas starting from birth. And so what we've learned and identified is that's really done through a positive sense of self is where we start. So to the question, let me see some of the things coming in. What makes you amazing? I'm seeing folks from all over, some ideas of being curious, determined, funny, the way we care. There are so many different ways to be amazing. And I'm curious as you're answering also how you feel about the question. So if you want to add that in as you've been asked this question, how does thinking about what makes you amazing feel? Because I know, and what I've seen with grown-ups over time is that we can often see what's so special in the children in our lives, and we're encouraging them to see that in themselves, and we're not always doing that for ourselves or taking that time to reflect. We might also have been conditioned to feel like it's arrogant to say what makes us special, and we might even make it feel like if we're saying it, we're comparing ourselves to others, but really there's enough space for every single one of us to be amazing. So that's what we're really going to be talking about with you all today. So we are going to be covering a lot of really rich, complex content in a very short time. So our goal today is to share some big picture ideas, focusing on positive identity development through the specific resources and content that we have developed that Ariel is really going to dive in with us later. And we do hope that in this conversation, in this time together, you'll feel validated with the work you're already doing. Hopefully we'll inspire you to do some new things and think in new ways. And then we really encourage you to continue to center this in all you do with the children in your lives. So if we go to the next slide, we've got the question again of what makes you amazing and why we chose that question. So there's really two reasons. First, the capacity for a child to see themselves as amazing is part of that positive identity development. It's at the foundation of how a children sees themselves is then through the lens through which they see the world and understand others. And then again, it becomes the foundation on which we're able to build complex ideas like talking about history, like talking about identity. And then if we go to the next slide, with the book. The other reason that we chose this question is because the resources we're going to be exploring later are based on this book that I wrote and worked on with an amazing artist, Katura. So Katura, hi. We love you. We love your work. And we spent a lot of time collaborating, thinking about how through the illustration she created and the words I wrote, we could really think about these different attributes that we hope our children will be and that we hope we will be to make the society a better place. So there's 26 attributes. So it's an ABC book, and we were asked to write one as a education department. And while we love a lot of the ABC books that show like A is for airplane and we show an object from our collection, we really wanted to create a book that was based on the lens through which we do our work and our philosophy, which is an anti-bias approach to education and learning. And so this is really the foundation of how children understand themselves and then begin to connect with others. So again, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to spend some time in that really big picture space of making sure we have a shared understanding of what identity is, what positive identity development means, and why it's so important and foundational. Before then, Ariel dives into what it looks like in practice and through the resources that we develop. So those of you joining us today might have this deep understanding of these concepts, and I invite you to add your understandings into the chat. Or some of you, this might be newer information. And so that's why we really want to start at a very clear foundational space to begin to explore this topic. Amazing, brave, emotional, kind, loving, fair, strong, vocal, resourceful, worthy. These are all attributes that humans can have. All humans have the capacity to be these things. And the children in our lives have that capacity. There are so many different ways of being. And the way I show up as strong might be different than the way you show up as strong. So we don't all have to look the same within having these different attributes. But what is critical and key is for children to see how they can be these things, to see themselves as capable, as strong, as resourceful, as brave as they navigate and move through life. So I want to return again to that question of what makes you amazing. And if you have a piece of paper and a pen, something to write, your phone, I want you to jot down some other words you would use to describe yourself, whether they're attributes or things that are important to how you see yourself, the picture you have of yourself as part of your identity. And as you write that down, I want you then, and if you want to continue to add in the chat, we'd love to see those comments. But as you write that down, I want you to also then think about why you describe yourself with these words. Did you have people in your life who described you this way? Are they aspirational words? Are they words that you hope to be? Or do you have lived experiences that have shown you those are things? You've had challenges that you know you've faced, so you know you're brave. As you think about that, I want you then to shift into thinking about the children in your lives. And again, either in the chat or on your own piece of paper, I want you to write down what words, what attributes you hope your children see them as, and what hopes you have for the children in your lives, whether it's in the classroom or at home. And I'll give you a moment to add some of those comments into the chat because I'd love to hear and have us all pause and reflect on what it is we hope for our children, because I think we're often working towards saying, oh, I hope my child feels good. I hope my child feels good in this space, in the classroom, at home. But really taking that time to reflect what it is we want them to be and why we want them to be that way. So keep adding that, keep thinking about that. And as you do that, positive identities enable a child to feel a sense of both individuality and belonging in their social world. This is so critical as they go out and navigate the world. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more about how identity is actually constructed. So identity is the picture a person holds of themselves and has of themselves. So a child constructs or creates an image, a picture, an understanding of themselves. What is so dynamic and complex, complicated about it is that it's both internally constructed and externally opposed. And when we understand that these forces are simultaneously happening, we can better understand the children in our lives. We can better understand ourselves. We can better relate human to human. And then for those of us with children in our lives, we can better support their positive identity development. So as a child internally is understanding themselves and creating that image and that picture of themselves, their brain is making sense. They're creating a narrative of who they are. They're also externally getting information and messages from the outside world of who they are. They're building an ever-changing picture that comes from home, comes from teacher, comes from the community, it comes from media. And this is why our role as grown-ups in the lives of children is so critical. We support the children in our lives to have a positive sense of self with the way we help them understand the messages they're receiving and translate what that means to them. It's an ongoing process. It's work that is so continual and it's so critical. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to get a little more, even more deeply into what this means and what this looks like. So from birth, every child is beginning their journey of constructing a unique and personal social identity. As a child grows, so does their awareness of the important identities that are assigned to them at birth. So that means those external messages that they receive about their race, their gender, ethnicity, age, and status within their community all goes to the child's brain to help them begin to understand who they are in the world, who they are in their community, who they are in their culture. And again, we can help navigate and translate those messages. Early identities are incredibly complex and they continue to change and grow as children experience new settings, activities, new relationships, new people, new responsibilities. And so it's a process. Our identity, even through our adulthood, is continually changing as we begin to understand ourselves in new ways. So I'm going to pause again and ask some more questions for you to consider. And again, if you feel comfortable, go ahead, add them into the chat, any of the responses you have, or just take some time to jot some notes down and reflect yourself. One question as as grown-ups we should consider, particularly as we're working with children of all different backgrounds, is when were you first aware of your race? And as you reflect on that and in your own life, I want you also to think about if there were ever any grown-ups that were there to help you navigate maybe some of the confusion that you might have felt around that part of your identity. Also, what external messages did you receive about your gender? What parts of your identity were you proud of? And were there moments that you might have felt shame around any of your identity pieces? And again, going back to that question of were there any grown-ups that were there to help navigate any of this confusion, any of these questions for you? One of the reasons these questions are important, again, is as we examine our own understanding of ourself and our own identities, we can then maybe recognize some bias we might hold. We can recognize how our construction of identity might influence the way we support the children in our lives. The other thing to be aware is that when societies might have inequalities or conflict, families and individuals may experience exclusion and discrimination. And these experiences also shape children's growing identity, their sense of who they are, where they belong, where they might not belong, and how they feel valued and respected. As the world tells our children who they are, what they can be, what they can't be, our job to support their positive identity is to show them and remind them of all of the positive things they can be, all of who they are, simultaneously, all the wonderful things they are. And so we can show them how we are the same in our humanity as we connect with others, and how our differences make us unique and wonderful. As grown-ups, we know how differences might be used to hurt people, but at this foundational level, as children are just coming into the world, we can build that understanding that differences are wonderful, that they should be recognized, they should be celebrated. And that then becomes the foundation for future conversations about what is fair and unfair and how to act for justice. One thing to remember is that we are profoundly the same in some ways, and we are profoundly and uniquely different in others. So, on to the next slide. Um, so, building of an identity that is positive empowers children to make connections with others, to see how we are the same and recognize how we are different. This creates the foundations for children to see what is fair and unfair, as I just said, and it empowers them to then begin to see how they can be change makers and stand up for justice. Because we operate and understand both the individual lived experience, how identity impacts us as individuals, but then how some of those social identities assigned to us impact us in systemic and institutional ways that might play out in policy, play out in laws, play out in how different groups of people are treated in our culture and society. And that awareness that we build in childhood then empowers children to recognize that later in their lives. On to the next slide. So, what does this look like in practice? I've already said I know this is ongoing practice. This is an ongoing process. So, it can look very differently depending on where you are. If you're at home, it can certainly look one way when you're with your own children. When you're in the classroom, it becomes the lens through which you can look at your whole curriculum. And then in the museum, we have the exciting opportunity to use objects in our collection to tell stories. So we know for young children that starting with the concrete and the narrative is so critical for them to understand these ideas that are more complex, and that we are honoring them as learners when we start with this way, in this way. And that although starting concretely is critical, we can actually build to have very sophisticated and abstract conversations with the children in our lives. Um, and the next slide, and Ariel's going to get more into this, what it looks like in practice through the examples of our resources. Um, this is this is the way in which we create all of our programs. So whether we're doing a program in the museum or we are creating a resource like we're about to explore, this is what we center in all we do. And it's the lens through which we understand the world and think about the world and think about how we can best serve the young children in our audience. Next page or next slide, please. So in the book, as I mentioned in the beginning that we created, I was part of a team to really think about the different words that we can be, and that we are these things at once, and helping our children not feel like they are labeled or put into a box. I think that is something that our culture does. It's part of being human is, right, we label things, we try to make sense by categorizing people and things and, being in the museum world, whether we're, like categorizing all of our different collections. But what then happens is that then the complexity of being a human is lost. And the reality that we can be many things at once can be lost. Um, that then becomes a foundation for stereotypical thinking, which can lead to prejudice and bias, and then um, other extremes of racism or sexism. And so we want to push against that thinking in all we do with young children. So by that we practicing with children, the understanding that we can be many things at once, we can, and it looks different for each person. We begin to build that brain memory, that understanding that creates a much more complex world. Um, it reinforces and helps critical thinking, which leads to then empathy, which again then leads to that understanding of what's fair and not fair, which leads to the ability to stand up for justice. So it's all connected and it's all simultaneously happening in our work. So these words in this book are all words we hope children see themselves as and express in their different unique ways. Each page has a definition of what the word is and then a thought question for a grown-up to explore with the child in their lives. And so from there, we started creating resources to connect with this book that connected to our museum collection, which is what Ariel will be exploring next. So thanks for letting me share some of that background on positive identity development, and I look forward to seeing your questions and having more conversation with you all. Ariel?
All right, so let's jump into our Joyful ABCs education series. That's on the next slide. My name is Ariel, and I am our lead education specialist for our children's programs and resources at the museum. Our Joyful ABCs series came about I guess towards the end of 2020, worked on it through the part into 2021. And we're trying to figure out how could we package essentially what we do at the museum in a way that people could do at home at the time or in their classroom with their students online. And so this is really awesome because it's kind of one of the first really tangible representations of our work. Normally people were experiencing these kinds of activities, these kinds of conversations in person, and then that's it. And so thankful for that time during the online period of being able to kind of put together a 26-part guide almost to how to provide these kinds of learning experiences, again, with wherever the setting is with your children in your life as a caregiver, as an educator. And it is a good example of what it looks like to combine positive identity development with museum objects and history and culture. So the series includes the children's book and then one booklet for each page, each letter of the book, then book and resource lists, object collection, and program videos. Next slide. We'll start by talking about the activity books in particular. They each they're based on the book. We actually have two editions of them. One is for infants and toddlers. The other, we started with, I guess, the developmental stage of 3 to 5s, but we have seen teachers in first, second, third grade use these as, at the very least, a starting point, if not actually using these same lessons, because we do think that a lot of the work we do can be applied to older age groups. And so at the beginning of the book, we give some insight into the developmental stages for a child so that you get some background. And then what we would often do at the museum program is provide a few different ways to learn about this topic and a few different ways for a child to reflect on themselves and the topic through play, movement, music, an art activity, and a literacy activity. And then we connect each of those activities with art and objects and photos in our collection. And we also provide some books and articles and videos, whether it's for you or it might also be suggested books for extending the learning. So we're going to take a look at one of those books today. That one is our K is for Kind page in the book. And what we did with that one, I guess when we have it on the screen, we'll take a closer look at the text of that one. But it says, offering a warm smile, being gentle, these small acts of kindness can make a big difference in someone's day. And like we mentioned earlier, we always have a question in there, which is, how were you kind today? And so something you may want to think about in using these booklets or in starting your own lessons is that with this series, we started with the positive identity development and then found objects or found stories within Black history and culture that connected to that. But that's actually not always the way that it goes. And I know a lot of the times, like in the classroom, you're trying to figure out the topic and the standard that you're trying to meet when it comes to the actual like historical event or the thematic I guess direction of a lesson. And the positive identity development may need to be pulled out of that later when you look more deeply at the characteristics of the people that are in those stories from history, or thinking about what parts of someone's identity is being shown by a historic figure or something like that. So let's take a look at the first few pages of the book or the booklet. And on the first page, you'll see that there is a explanation of what the word kind means and what we're meaning by that developmentally for the 3 to 5 age range, but it can also be applicable to other age groups like we were mentioning, as well as the materials and things that you'll need for the project. And then there's also the explore activity. So I'll wait till the slide is updated before, so then you don't get too confused there. Okay, yeah, so there, the explorer activity there, that's one of the first activities you'll see where we are then connecting the theme of kindness to a story from history. In particular, we decided to connect kindness to the story of the Black Panther Party during the Civil Rights Movement. Now, that's not something that is typically thought of when you think of the Black Panther Party. We often have those images of them in their leather jackets and their berets and looking very militant, and that was an core part of the work that they did, but they also were community leaders and did a lot of community outreach. And so we talk about 3 of the ways that they did that, which was providing food, free meals to people in the Black community, as well as lower income communities, providing clothing, as well as providing free healthcare. And so these are big ideas, big parts of a history. But one of the things that, so back to what Anna was saying, is that we can talk a lot about what other people were doing in history or what other people do in their culture. But it does not necessarily, I guess, stick sometimes with children if they're not able to see why this is relevant to their own life or who they are in that story. And so we always are not just talking about the people in that story, we're also talking to people, the little people who we are talking to at the same time. And so I feel like a lot of the times we talk about something being unfair, like treating someone different because of the way that they look, but we never gave children the opportunity to love how they look first, to see, if I was that person in that situation and someone was treating me that way, because I love how I look and how it's okay for my classmates to look the way they do, I can see for myself what this story is, what's wrong here and what's not okay in this moment in history, versus just being told that as a lesson, and so let's move to the next slide. And so that's where our question asking is really important for us, and opportunities for children to participate in the understand, I guess, the definition or the defining of like what is going on in the story. It's actually it should be a previous slide. It might be there. Yeah, there we go. Okay, good. Okay, so I zoomed in a little bit here just to tell you the kinds of things that we talked about there. So we talked about what kindness could mean, and one aspect of it, which is by helping people get what they need. And then, we have a question that talks about what kinds of food does your family enjoy? And a question like that allows everyone to contribute something, to think about who they are and how it makes them feel to eat that meal, what it feels like when we may not get to have that meal, and understanding then why it was so important for the Black Panthers to provide meals to people in the community, so that they could not only taste that really something that is favorite food to them, but also so they could have that community building that happens when you get to sit at the table with your family and have a meal, for example. And so a lot of what we do is really the story and the opportunity, giving children the opportunity then to be proud of who they are, makes them better able to then empathize with other people, and then to understand the work of activists in this story or what's going on in the larger story. I think that the takeaway, I guess, for all of you, for me, would be to say that like celebration and affirmation of who children are is really should be alongside, if not before, we're having these bigger conversations about something like the civil rights movement, for example. Okay, next slide.
I think it might be the previous. Let's see. Is it that?
Oh, did it go out of order? I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, thank
I
you.
just want to make sure it was correct.
Okay. But yes, this was the one I was wanting. So we have a few other examples. Something I do want to emphasize is that I noticed, for this booklet in particular, we used a lot of photographs. But that's partially because the objects didn't photograph as well. So we have, for example, in these images, there are people working together to build shelters for people to live in. We have pieces of those shelters and things like that, but it didn't come across as well. But that's something that would happen in a museum, or by using Learning Lab, you may get an opportunity to look more closely at objects like that. But anyways, we like to use the photographs, but we also, as you see on the next page after that, you'll see that desk that's there, or a book. So it can be a range of objects. But the goal of all of that is to not just do important skills like close looking at objects or analyzing what's going on in photos, but also being able to relate, to say what kind of place do you live in and what makes it comfortable to you, being able to tell a story. So what did you learn at school, and how do you show kindness to your classmates? How does your teacher show kindness to you? So we're always doing both of those things, because I think when we are able to show kids that they are worthy of love and respect, they then are better able to understand why the person next to them is worthy of love and respect. And then they're better able to identify situations, whether it's in history or currently, in which that truth is not showing up in the actions of leaders in their community, neighbors, whatever the situation might be. But any kind of story helps them to better understand it. So next slide, next slide, I guess. There we go. So we have modeled this a bit for you all. You can take a look at our videos from our Joyful Friday series. There is one video for every 26 letters And this is a good model of what it looks like to do both of those things, to look at an painting or to think about a object and then also relate it to yourself. And so we have this one in particular. E is for emotional. I believe we looked at a few different kinds of photographs to talk about the different ways that we could feel, different paintings that showed how the artist might be feeling. And then we practice making some faces, and then we drew some self-portraits there. On the next slide, let's see which one. This one I think is from, F is for fair. A little bit of a more, one of those more challenging kind of stories to talk about, which is the reason behind why people were protesting to let people know that they were actually a human, even though they were being treated like they weren't, or that they weren't a human that deserved as much respect and pay and healthcare and things like that. And we ended up talking with kids about, I guess, almost answering that same question of what we answered earlier, which is what makes you amazing? What is something that you want people to know about who you are? And how does it feel when someone tells you you're not that thing? And so we have those examples for you. Those are available to watch. And we always include the resources that we reference in there in the details. So take a look at that. And then on the next slide, this is the last bit of what I was going to talk about, which is that we also have a learning lab collection for, well, we have two different ones. But all of our learning lab collections are collections of objects from our museums. We have them for a lot of different topics. So not just from the Joyful series, but like any topic you might want to talk about, we're getting there on developing those and just using those, whether you want to use them as tools for having a deeper conversation about something already being talked about in your classroom, or just to get some practice in looking. But on our next, in the next collection, let me see which slide that was going to be. Okay, so we have one collection for you that will have all of the objects and photos and art pieces from both editions of the booklet. So the infant and toddler ones, as well as the older friends. And so they're all there for you. So you'll be able to take, we oftentimes in the booklets have some guiding questions of take a closer look at something. And we include the link in the booklet for you to get to take a closer look with your students. And then also in the next collection, we have the basically PDF directions for some of the projects, as well as the supplies list, the resources list for each one of the Joyful Fridays videos. So I guess this is the end of my sharing. So moral of the story is that we think that learning about big topics in history, about identity, about culture, are really enhanced when kids have the opportunity to think about themselves at the same time. And we are hoping that this helps you do some of that in your learning in the next few months of the school year, but also at home with anyone you want to have that with. So feel free to reach out to us if you ever have questions or are looking for something in particular. We monitor that email address so we can send you links if we have them to something specific. But other than that, I know we are coming close to time, but we may have some time for some extra questions if anyone has them right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
the booklets are all free. So I saw, can you purchase the booklets? They're all free. They're all on our website. So they're within the links. You can download them. They're all available. And I wanted to acknowledge our friend Ariel in the chat, who mentioned how hard it is to get these complex ideas into the simple language that children need. And so that's what, we really practice doing. So if you watch the videos, if you read the booklets, we hope to, part of our work is modeling that for other grown-ups. So if you watch Ariel and Tammy and our other colleagues on our team, you'll see that happening. And if you read the beginning of each booklet, we worked as a team to really get it into language that's accessible and age appropriate.
Yeah.
So there's some hopefully some modeling and some areas you can look at that will help if that's something you're feeling challenged with.
Yeah, no, I definitely hope it's helpful, because sometimes it does take hours to figure out a sentence on
Like
how to
one
explain
sentence.
something that
Yep.
happened in history. So we hope, yeah, some of that will be useful to you all. But yeah, the book you do need to purchase, but all the book pages are technically in the booklets, in case you weren't able to do that. But the booklets are free, PDFs online, downloadable. Yeah.
And one other thing just to mention is we do have a series that's not exactly related to this, but it's called Caregiver Conversations. We have one coming up in April that will be with Tiffany Jewell, who's a brilliant educator, and she does awesome job also modeling how to have conversations that really are accessible. So if you look at our events page, that's coming up in April. And I'm sorry I don't have the link. I should have thought of that. So.
We can, here, I'll show you just briefly that I put together a collection here with most of the links shared, and I'll add in any additional from what we covered today. So here's that collection there, and we can add the additional links.
Oh, great. Thanks, Philippa.
Oh, yeah, it's fine. I'm gesturing on the screen, but I had turned off the screen. But the link is in the chat. So, do we have any other questions? I don't know if I have a question or a comment, but it's always so amazing to me how much research is behind everything you've shared today. So you've done so much research and work, and then also just putting your heart and your mind into this to condense it into something that's so effective, for little children. It's just so interesting to me.
Thanks, Philippa.
Yeah, thank you. I think that when we are doing that behind the scenes work, we then think about like teachers and parents and the combination of other things that we also need to think about. And so it makes us definitely more determined to spend that time just to make it just one, just even a tiny bit easier to do something that is really important for their little ones. So yeah, it's definitely a pleasure and a big work. It's big work and heart, mind, and yeah, all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, people can always reach out more later if you ever have any kinds of questions, even if you think I don't know, they're silly or it's a safe space in our inbox to ask some things. So please feel free to reach out and let us know if we can support you in other ways.
Yep. And we see ourselves as learners and always learning too. So it's not something we check off. It's something we're always doing ourselves.
Yeah, we're not done yet. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for being with us. And thanks, Philippa.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Ariel. You're the best.
Bye.
Bye, friends.